Caylee Anthony, also known as the most hated mom in America, announced on TikTok recently that she was stepping into a new role as a legal advocate for women and the LGBTQ community. You might recognize her because back in 2011, the infamous mom was put on trial and then acquitted for the murder of her young daughter, Caylee. But now she says she's been working in some vague capacity in the legal field ever since. She says as some kind of researcher, although we don't really know what that means exactly, but she indicates that that gives her some kind of credibility to be a legal advocate of some sort. And so she invited people over to her Substack account for more information about her advocacy. But it didn't take long for this to sour and for Caylee to start making some not so veiled threats of defamation lawsuits against people for calling her a murderer and a terrible mother. And so in this video, we are going to talk about whether or not Caylee Anthony can successfully sue people for defamation for calling her a murderer and a terrible mother when she admittedly has been acquitted. Let's get into it.
In the Circuit Court for the 9th Judicial Circuit in and for Orange County, Florida, State of Florida versus Caylee Marie Anthony. As to case number 2008 CF 15606-0. As to the charge of first-degree murder, verdict as to count 1, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, on this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, verdict as to count 2, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson. As to the charge of aggravated manslaughter of a child, verdict as to count 3, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all, dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson.
So Caylee Anthony was ultimately acquitted of murder because the prosecution failed to meet their burden of proving her guilt beyond reasonable doubt. But there are many people out there who still believe that she murdered her daughter Caylee. And that's because there admittedly is a lot of weirdness that still persists in this case. And so to get to this question about whether or not it's defamatory to call Caylee Anthony a murderer and a terrible mother and an unfit mother, we first have to go over at least a little bit the facts surrounding the accusation that Caylee murdered her daughter Caylee. Caylee Anthony's story starts in June 2008 when Caylee reportedly left her parents' home in Florida with her 2-year-old daughter Caylee. But then something strange happened. Caylee came back, but seemingly without Caylee. 30 days had passed, and suddenly Caylee shows up at her parents' home without her daughter. That's when Caylee's mother, Cindy, called the police and reported her granddaughter missing. And actually, Cindy made several 911 calls on the same evening, and the substance of those calls was one of the first weird things to happen in this case.
Hi, I drove to the police department here on Pershing, but you guys are closed. I need to bring someone into the police department. Can you tell me where the closest one I can come into?
What are you trying to accomplish by bringing them to the station?
I have a 22-year-old person that has grand theft sitting in my auto with me.
So the 22-year-old person stole something?
Yes.
Is this a relative?
Yes.
Where did they steal it from?
My car and also money.
Okay, is this your son?
Daughter.
Okay, so your daughter stole money from your car?
No, my car was stolen. We retrieved it today. We found out where it was at. I've retrieved it. I've got that, and I've got affidavit for my banking account. I want to bring her in. I want to press charges.
Where did all of this happen?
Oh, it's been happening.
No, but I need to establish a jurisdiction is what I'm trying.
Oh, I live in Orlando.
Yeah, but what address did these thefts occur at?
Well, I guess my residence, I guess.
Okay.
4937 Hope Spring Drive. Because my next thing will be down the child thing, and we'll have a court order together. If that's what you want to say, we'll do it. And you'll never. Well, then you have on one day. No, I'm not giving you another day. I've given you a month.
What's the address of your emergency?
4937 Hope Spring Drive.
4937 Hope Spring
Drive, Orlando.
Okay, what's happening?
I have someone here that I need to be arrested in my home.
They're there right
now? I have a possible missing child. I have a 3-year-old that's been missing for a month.
A 3-year-old?
Yes.
Have you reported that?
I'm trying to do that now, ma'am.
Okay, what did the person do that you need arrested?
My daughter.
For what?
For stealing an auto and stealing money. I already spoke with someone. They said they would patch me through the Orlando Sheriff's Department and have a deputy here. I was in the car. I was going to drive her to the police station, and no one's open. They said they would bring a deputy to my home when I got home to call them.
So she stole your vehicle?
Yes.
When did she do that?
On the 30th. I just got it back from the impound. I'd like to speak to an officer. Can you have someone come out to my house?
Okay. Okay, I got to ask you these questions so I can put them in the call, okay?
Okay.
30th of June?
Yes.
Okay, how old is your daughter?
22.
Okay, what's her name?
My name?
Her name.
Her name, Caylee Anthony. Casey.
And your name?
Cynthia Anthony.
Cynthia, can I get a phone number that I can reach you at?
407-808-4731.
And you said you have the vehicle back?
Yes. And I have the statement.
Casey's there right now?
Yes, I got her. I finally found her after a month. She's been missing for a month. I found her, but we can't find my granddaughter. 911, what's your emergency? I called a little bit ago, the deputy sheriff's down here. I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally admitted that she's been missing.
Okay, what is
here now?
Okay, what is the address that you're calling from?
4937 Hope Spring Drive. We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl.
4937 what?
Hope Spring, HOPESPRING Drive, Orlando. My daughter finally admitted that the baby's in the store. I need to find her.
Your daughter admitted that the baby is where?
But the babysitter took her a month ago that my daughter's been looking for. I told you my daughter was missing for a month. I just found her today, but I can't find my granddaughter. And she just admitted to me that she's been trying to find her herself. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car.
Okay, what is the 3-year-old's name?
Caylee, Caylee, Anthony.
Caylee Anthony?
Yes.
Okay, is she white, black, or Hispanic?
She's white.
How long has she been missing for?
I have not seen her since the 7th of June.
What is her date of birth?
8/9/2000. Oh God, she's 3. She's 2005. George Kaylee's missing. Kaylee's missing. Casey says Danny took her a month ago. She's been missing for a month.
Okay, I understand. Can you calm down for me for just a minute, and I need to know what's going on, okay? I'm gonna try and talk. Is your daughter there?
I'm on the phone with them.
Is your daughter there?
Yes.
Can I speak with her? Do you mind if I speak with her? Thank you.
I called them 2 hours ago. They haven't gotten here. They finally admitted to Danny took her a month ago.
Ma'am.
Okay, Danny's here. They want to talk to you. Answer the question. Hello?
Hello?
Yes.
Hi. Well, can you tell me what's going on a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can you tell me a little bit what's going on?
My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days.
And you know who has her?
I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today, now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute.
Okay, did you guys call and report a vehicle stolen?
Yes, my mom did.
Okay, so there's been a vehicle stolen too?
No, this was my vehicle.
What vehicle was stolen?
It's a 98 Pontiac Sunfire.
Okay, I have deputies on the way to you right now for that. But now your 3-year-old, okay, your 3-year-old daughter is missing. Caylee Anthony.
Yes.
White female.
Anthony. Yes, white female.
3 years old, 8/9/2005 is her date of birth?
Yes.
And you last saw her a month ago?
31 days. From 31 days.
Who has her? Do you have a name?
Her name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez.
Who is that? Babysitter?
She's been my nanny for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years.
Why are you calling now? Why didn't you call 31 days ago?
I've been looking for her and have gone through other resources to try to find her, which was stupid.
Okay. Can you give me the name of the nanny again? Like, spell it out for me?
Zenaida, Zenaida.
Last name?
Fernandez. - Gonzalez. I think the officers are here.
The officers are there?
Yes.
Now, aside from this weirdness of this escalation of these 911 calls, with so much time having gone by since Caylee was last seen, people couldn't help but wonder, why did it take so long for anyone here to call 911? Now, aside from that, once those calls were made, the police obviously started asking questions, and Casey had a story to give them. She said she hadn't seen Caylee for a whole month, but then she dropped a bombshell. According to her, a babysitter named Zenaida Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez had kidnapped her daughter. But there was one big problem with this revelation. No one could find this so-called babysitter, and so people thought that she essentially just completely made her up. And the more investigators dug into this case, the more things just didn't add up. So now, just one day after Cindy reported Caylee missing, Caylee Anthony found herself in handcuffs. On July 16, 2008, her story fell apart and police arrested her on charges of child neglect, making false statements to police, and obstruction. For one thing, she had claimed that she had left Caylee at her babysitter's apartment, but there apparently was no babysitter. And then she said she also worked at Universal Studios, but this turned out to be completely false as well. So at this point, detectives knew that there was something seriously wrong with this whole situation, and their suspicions obviously skyrocketed. And then on October 14th, 2008, a Florida grand jury officially indicted Caylee Anthony on first-degree murder charges in connection with Caylee's disappearance. Prosecutors weren't playing around. These charges carried the possibility of the death penalty. And at this point, it was no longer just about lies and missing person reports. The authorities were convinced that something far worse had happened to Caylee and that Casey was responsible. But the biggest problem for investigators at this point was the fact that even though they suspected that Caylee had died, no one had found her body yet.
The little girl was last seen 4 months ago, and an exhaustive search has failed to turn up any signs of her. Investigators say they are convinced that Caylee Anthony was murdered. A Florida grand jury indicted Caylee Anthony on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, and 4 counts of lying to investigators.
But then, in December 2008, more than 5 months after she was reported missing, a meter reader by the name of Roy Kronk found Caylee's remains less than a mile away from the Anthony home. At trial, he testified that back in August 2008, months before Caylee's remains were officially found, he actually was with some colleagues when he happened upon what looked like a human skull. Concerned, he said that he called the police the next day and even met with an officer at the scene. But instead of investigating further, the deputy reportedly just dismissed him, telling him he was wasting their time. Now fast forward to December 11th, 2008, Kronk was in the same area again when he stumbled upon Caylee's remains again. This time, after poking a stick into the skull, there was no mistaking it. He later recalled on the stand, "I did not know what it was. I never lifted it off the ground. That was a very horrific thing for me to find, obviously." But there were problems with his testimony. Before trial, he had testified in a number of depositions, and there he said that rather than poking it with a stick and then leaving it alone, he had lifted up a bag 4 feet off the ground and a skull had fallen out. Now that obviously is quite a contradiction between these two tellings of the same story, and with something as important as this kind of evidence, these inconsistencies proved to be just one of a number of problems in this whole case for the prosecutors. And this was on top of the fact that, unfortunately, because Caylee's remains had been left out in the elements for so long, it didn't leave much forensic evidence behind for prosecutors to be able to definitively show how Caylee even died. Now, aside from that, one of the big things that people often point to when they say that they believe that Caylee Anthony killed Caylee Anthony is some of Casey's admittedly very weird behavior when Caylee was missing. As this case progressed, the world soon learned, and was subsequently horrified as a result, that when Caylee went missing, Casey really didn't seem all that concerned. In fact, instead of desperately searching for her child, Casey was out at nightclubs, drinking with friends, and even taking part in things like a hot body contest. People were shocked. How could a mother behave like that when her daughter was missing? This behavior, on top of the fact that it took 31 days before anyone called 911, earned her the title of the most hated mom in America. But Casey, for her part, had an explanation. She later claimed that she wasn't actually partying, she was working. According to her, the photos of her dancing and having fun weren't what they seemed. Rather, she insisted that she was just trying to make money and was not out celebrating while her daughter was missing. But needless to say, not all that many people bought this explanation, especially when it was layered upon other decisions that Casey was making around this time.
We're now learning all sorts of things in court documents and in open court. For instance, very soon after Caylee goes missing, in other words, is murdered by her own mother, Tot Mom, she arranges a helicopter thrill ride for herself. Now, there's a grieving mom. Take a look at Tot Mom. Here she is working through her grief. Take a look. Now, hold on. There you go. There you go. She knows right where to put that. That's a case of beer. And, of course, in those bags are all of her sexy lingerie she just bought David Lohr for another night on the town partying. Explain to me, David Lohr, joining us from Huffington Post, how the defense could argue this was inadmissible.
Anyway, Caylee Anthony's murder trial kicked off on May 24th, 2011 in Orlando, Florida, and it quickly became one of the most publicized courtroom battles in American judicial history. For over 6 weeks, the world watched as prosecutors laid out their case, accusing Casey of killing her 2-year-old daughter, Caylee. But Casey's defense team, led by Jose Baez, had a completely different story. They claimed that Caylee's death wasn't a murder at all. Rather, according to them, the toddler had accidentally drowned in the family's pool. And instead of calling 911, Casey panicked and hid the body because of the traumatic effects of sexual abuse by her father. And the defense further argued that Casey's father, George Anthony, helped Casey to cover it up by burying the child in their backyard. Now, the defense's theory was obviously a shocking accusation leveled at George Anthony. Baez further argued that this lifelong trauma explained why Casey had been caught in so many lies. She had a habit of lying, which was her way of coping with years of abuse.
Defense attorney Jose Baez wasted no time painting a picture of sex abuse, lies, and dark family secrets. That picture is his attempt to explain why Casey lied about knowing where Caylee was.
This child, who at 8 years old, learned to lie immediately. She could be 13 years old, have her father's in her mouth, and then go to school and play with the other kids as if nothing ever happened.
George Anthony sat stoic as Baez called him a child molester. Caylee Anthony came apart.
But when George took the stand, he didn't just deny the claims. He vehemently rejected them, insisting they were completely untrue.
Have you ever sexually molested your daughter, Caylee Anthony?
No, sir.
Were you present in your home when Caylee Anthony died?
No, and when I heard that today, it hurt really bad.
And after a 1.5-month-long trial, the jury in the Florida 9th Judicial Circuit Court didn't take long to decide Caylee Anthony's fate. In just under 11 hours, they reached a verdict. At this point, the case had captured the entire nation, turning into a frenzied TV spectacle. People couldn't get enough of the shocking details. Experts testifying about the smell of death coming from Casey's car trunk, the heartbreaking mystery of little Caylee's disappearance, and the wild courtroom twists. But more than anything, people were stunned by Caylee herself, a young mother who didn't seem so broken over her daughter's death. Instead, she was out partying and laughing and seemingly acting like nothing was wrong. But despite everything that came out, all the weird behavior by Caylee, the wild accusations against her father, the fact that Kaylee's remains were found close to the Anthony home, and the fact that no one called 911 for over a month, when the verdict was read, people were shocked. Caylee Anthony was found not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of manslaughter, not guilty of child abuse. The only thing she was convicted of? Lying to the police. So given all of the weirdness in this case, there is a big question here. How was it that Caylee was acquitted? Well, for starters, like I mentioned before in this video, in any criminal case, the prosecution needs to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. That is a very high burden to meet, and for good reason. We're talking about, at the very least, the liberty of a human being, and at most, a potential death penalty. And so if the defense introduces any number of possibilities that causes a reasonable person to doubt the validity of the prosecution's case, the jury should not be convicting. And in this particular case, the jury found that there just was enough reasonable doubt in this case that they unanimously found that they could not convict Caylee based on the evidence that was presented. This was confirmed in subsequent interviews that some of the jurors gave. For example, one juror said that none of the jurors liked Caylee, and they all suspected that she probably did something wrong, but said that the prosecutors simply didn't give them enough for them to be able to convict. As an example, like I mentioned before, the prosecution didn't even have enough direct evidence to show definitively how Caylee died. Prosecutors had painted a grim picture, claiming Caylee placed duct tape over Kaylee's nose and mouth to suffocate her. But the defense, led by Jose Baez, countered with an entirely different story. Caylee accidentally drowning in the family swimming pool, and Caylee's father, George Anthony, helping Caylee to cover it up. And so the defense had an alternative theory that the jury may have found compelling, or at the very least, it was enough to open up the case with reasonable doubt. And what's more, jurors responded to the way that the attorneys in the case presented themselves in the courtroom. In an interview, one said that they found the lead prosecutor, Jeff Ashton, as coming across ambitious and arrogant, and one of the other prosecutors as mechanical and cold. By comparison, Baez, Caylee's defense attorney, seemed to be the only one in the room who really cared about the outcome of the trial. Now, since her acquittal, Caylee and her parents have sat down for numerous interviews and docuseries trying to express their perspectives on what happened.
There are more explosive revelations from the new docuseries about the notorious Caylee Anthony.
What do you think my question is going to be?
Why did I wait 31 days to call 911?
911, what's your emergency? My daughter's been missing for the last...
But now, Caylee has decided to join both TikTok and Substack. On March 1st, 2025, she launched her TikTok account, introducing herself as a legal advocate and announcing her new Substack newsletter. In a 3-minute video, Caylee told viewers that if she wanted to be a legal advocate, she needed to start by advocating for herself and for her daughter, Caylee. However, as anyone with substantial experience on the internet can attest, when you decide to step out into public discourse on the internet, what you get back isn't always totally rosy. And one of the first things Caylee posted to her Substack following this TikTok announcement was basically a threat of litigation against people who were giving her negative feedback on her proposed legal advocacy. For everyone speaking good, bad, or otherwise, heed your words and make sure you are saying something of substance. Here's the law in Florida about threats, libel, and slander, etc. You don't have to be a Florida resident to be charged. Jurisdiction is where the crime was committed usually. If it's over the internet and you're saying something hateful, slanderous, libel, threatening, bullying, etc., the recipient party can request the jurisdiction be in the state where they live, not the state where you committed the act. The internet is not a protected place. My next thread, I will be posting the statutes for every one of our 50 states and our territories. Even for those of you saying these things about me, I am still going to continue to do what I said I was going to do, which is advise you of your rights and the law. It is public record. And if necessary, I will remind you that this is not legal advice, purely public information. You need to educate yourselves before you implicate yourselves. I would say stop the bullshit, but I think that's asking a little too much. We all have the same freedom of speech, but the First Amendment does not protect you against these things most of the time. So unsolicited advice, proceed with caution. So reading this, you might say, well, geez, what kind of crazy commentary has she been receiving that she calls libel libel and slander. Threats are one thing, absolutely distasteful to say the least, and at their most extreme, can, in some circumstances, be the basis for criminal or civil liability. But as I've covered defamation probably more than really any other topic on this channel, I'm really most interested in that piece. So I looked at the comments to see if there's any sort of indication of what Caylee considers to be defamatory statements. And I will say, for someone who calls herself a legal advocate and is telling other people that they need to educate themselves on the law, her writings about the law leave something to be desired. Just as an example, there's this interaction. Someone commented, "LOL, truth is not slander," which is actually correct. Truth of a statement is a complete defense to any defamation claim. And here, Caylee responds, "The truth is not slander, correct, but opinion based on statements not based on actual facts is. Your opinion that something is fact doesn't make it so." Wrong. Wrong. This is totally wrong. An opinion statement is not a statement that can be the basis of a defamation claim. Full stop.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Now, she is right that someone cannot make a factual statement and then try to say that that is just their opinion. But a true opinion, even when based on incorrect facts, is not necessarily defamatory, particularly when we are talking about public figures. Now, in another comment, she also talks about hate speech. Specifically, she says bullying is considered hate speech and hate speech is not protected under the First Amendment. And she points to people getting their opinions across in a malicious or hateful manner. Ugh. This is also totally incorrect. Now, granted, this is something that a lot of people on the internet get wrong all the time. But the problem is, most people on the internet who get this wrong aren't trying to put themselves out there as legal advocates and telling other people that they need to educate themselves about the law. So this is for Caylee and the future of her legal advocacy. Allow me to clarify some things about defamation and about hate speech. In the US, hate speech is still protected by the First Amendment. The only times that it isn't protected is if it falls into specific, very specific, narrow categories like true threats, incitement to violence, or targeted harassment. For example, in Brandenburg v. Ohio, the U.S. Supreme Court, all the way back in 1969, said that the government cannot punish inflammatory speech unless that speech is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. So language on the internet that is just rude or even malicious or even hateful is not punishable by the government. And this was more recently reinforced in 2011 when the U.S. Supreme Court held in Snyder v. Phelps that speech made in a public place on a matter of public concern cannot be the basis of liability for a tort of intentional infliction of emotional distress or defamation, even if the speech is viewed as offensive or outrageous. In that particular case, members of the controversial Westboro Baptist Church, a group known for picketing with very offensive signs, picketed the funeral of Lance Corporal Matthew Snyder, a U.S. Marine who was killed in a non-combat accident during the Iraq War. Protesters displayed signs with hateful messages designed to basically deeply offend probably just about every segment of American society. I'm not going to read them out loud because they are absolutely horrendous, but you can see examples in the photos on screen. Families sued for intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation, but the Supreme Court said that this was protected speech that couldn't form the basis of these claims. So keep in mind, as horrible as these words spewed by the Westboro Baptist Church are, the U.S. Supreme Court said it was still protected speech because they were in a public place and they were speaking on a matter of public concern. And when it comes to the First Amendment, discriminations of speech based on viewpoint will almost never be allowed. So if someone is talking about a matter of public concern, say, for example, how the criminal justice system works in a case where a very small child has allegedly been murdered, people are allowed to use very spicy words to voice their opinions and still be protected by the First Amendment from criminal and civil liability alike. So calling Caylee a murderer or calling Caylee the worst mom in the world, those are things that are probably hurtful to her, but barring some very specific instances where someone says something that's along the lines of a true threat, it's protected speech. And looking at all of the negative comments in Caylee's Substack comment section on this particular post, none of these seem to rise to that level. So that's hate speech. Although what we just talked about also touches on defamation a bit, just to make sure we've really covered this whole subject, let's talk specifically about defamation. As a reminder, the U.S. Supreme Court case in Snyder v. Phelps was a case where the Snyder family sued the Westboro Baptist Church for intentional infliction of emotional distress, as well as defamation and other claims. And the Supreme Court said that the statements made by the Westboro Baptist Church, as god-awful as they were, couldn't be the basis of a defamation claim because they were essentially opinion statements on a matter of public interest. So that's going to have a direct application in this situation as well, since this case has had massive public interest, essentially since that first 911 call was made. So let's look at the actual elements of defamation so that we can highlight this point. Now, to start out, Caylee Anthony is obviously a public figure due to the high publicity of the trial and investigation starting around 2008. And in fact, she even admits to this in her Substack bio, where she refers to herself as a household name for over 16 years. So really, there's no argument here that she is a public figure. Because of that, in order to win on a case of defamation, she is going to need to prove 4 elements. First, she needs to show that the defendant has made a false statement of fact about her. Second, she needs to give proof that this person made that statement to a third person. If it's a statement that's out in the public on the internet, that's probably going to be pretty easily proved in a case like this. Third, she needs to show that the person who made this statement made it with actual malice. This means she has to show that the person either knew that what they were saying was false or was reckless as to the truth or falsity of the statement. And finally, she needs to show that her reputation was harmed by this person making this statement. So let's start with element number 4. Due to the infamously public nature of this whole trial and the countless interviews that she's done over the years since that trial, it's going to be really hard for her to prove that some hurtful comment on the internet has harmed her reputation. If there's anything that's caused reputational damages, it's probably the trial that happened over a decade ago, which had America glued to their screens. So that's her first problem in any kind of a defamation case, having to do with the label of her being a murderer. And that's a really big problem for her to have. Now, her second big problem is going to be element number 1, proving any of these statements are false statements of fact. Now, it seems that what she's really responding to here are people calling her either a murderer or a horrible mom. Now, it should be noted that yes, she was acquitted of murder in 2011. And so that means that in the eyes of Florida's criminal judicial system, she is not considered a murderer. However, acquittal of a criminal charge is not necessarily the same thing as exoneration. Let me put it this way. Remember that in order for prosecutors to convict in any kind of a criminal case, they have to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. This means that if the jurors have really any amount of doubt as to the guilt of the defendant, and that doubt is based off of something reasonable, something logical that comes up or doesn't come up in the trial, then the prosecution loses. And so now there are a number of different levels that a criminal defendant can have in the strength of their case and still win. You can have a case like the 2021 murder trial against Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, when he fired on 3 people during the riots that followed the Black Lives Matter protests. There, video surveillance footage saved the teen from a murder conviction when the jury found that it showed he was acting in self-defense in each and every encounter that he was charged for. And so this means that there was specific evidence that the defense was able to point to in order to, in some way at least, exonerate the defendant both in the court of law and in the court of public opinion. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to agree on whether the outcome of that trial was proper, but it's at least something that the defendant can point to moving forward with the rest of his or her life. Anyway, then there's the case where the defendant at most can really just make the argument that there wasn't enough evidence in order to convict the defendant under the standards that we have for our criminal justice system. In a case like that, where there really isn't any smoking gun evidence necessarily that truly exonerates the defendant, even if they're acquitted, there's still a big question in the minds of many people in the public as to whether or not this person actually committed the crime. O.J. Simpson's criminal trial for the murder of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson is an example of this. On October 3rd, 1995, the jury acquitted him, and very quickly. And many people at the time celebrated his acquittal because they saw it as a political victory at a time when race relations were very tense in Los Angeles, and there were many accusations of racism leveled against the LAPD and the LA County DA. But even though he was acquitted, not everyone agreed with the verdict. And as interest has remained very high in his case over the years, it seems more and more people believe that OJ actually did kill Nicole Brown Simpson. But the thing is, regardless of whether a defendant was acquitted because there is some sort of strong evidence that corroborates their theory of the case, or whether a defendant was acquitted simply because the prosecution just didn't meet their burden, calling someone a murderer after that person has been very publicly tried for murder is a matter of opinion. And that's particularly where there's been enough evidence to support charges and a whole trial of this person. So even in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, who I personally think had very strong evidence that he acted in self-defense and therefore is not a murderer, I would say that even he would not be able to bring any kind of a real case of defamation against someone calling him a murderer. And so I would say the same thing for Caylee Anthony. And this is reinforced even more so when we talk about defamation's element number 3, actual malice. Remember that all of these high-profile trials essentially create public figures, except for the case of someone like O.J. Simpson, who already was a public figure before all of that happened. So if any of these individuals wanted to sue someone for defamation for making statements about them being some kind of a murderer like that, they would all need to show actual malice. And that means that they have to prove that these individuals making these statements either know for a fact that what they are saying is false, or that they are being reckless as to the truth or falsity of the statement. Unless these individuals are saying that they themselves were eyewitnesses to these events, all they really need to do to defeat actual malice is to point to any of the reporting on the investigation or the trial of any of these cases and show that they have a reasonable belief in what they are saying. And in the case of Caylee Anthony, there are many, many things that people can point to show that they have a reasonable belief that she murdered Caylee. There's the 31 days before her mom called 911. Then there's the fact that Casey was out at nightclubs while Caylee was missing. Casey can say things like this was some sort of coping mechanism or that she was working, and people can either accept or reject those explanations. Then there are the many, many lies that Casey was caught in during the investigation and trial. Even if any of these details are misreported by the media, people forming opinions reasonably based off of this reporting, even misreporting, are still able to defeat the element of actual malice. So really looking at the elements of defamation, Caylee Anthony's threat of defamation liability comes up a bit empty. And for someone that is putting herself out there as a legal advocate and also chiding people to tell them to educate themselves, it's a bit of a rough start for her to go this route, especially when she's getting it very, very wrong. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Were you familiar with the details of the Caylee Anthony trial before all of this? What do you think of her plans for legal advocacy on behalf of women in the LGBTQ community? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more coverage of crazy cases and interesting legal topics, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out there. And if you're really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel, consider becoming a member of Fight Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. Otherwise, see you in the next one.